Speaking freedom, giving you the answers to be free. Be free.
Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's performance is about to begin.
Hey everybody, welcome to today's episode of Journey to Speak. Lord, I said this is unedited, right? But I think we're gonna edit that part out, but I might leave it.
I mean,
Hey everybody.
have your outtakes.
I mean, no, I mean, Welcome to Speaking Freedom TV, everybody. Today's episode of Journey to Freedom, we are introducing to you Mr. Shane. And of course, I am your host, Dr. Kaci. So, Shane, tell me about yourself.
Hey there, I am Shane Trapp. I am an ADHD entrepreneur and parenting coach. I wear a lot of different hats, as many people with ADHD do. I also run a men's ADHD support group with like 20,000 members on Facebook. I run two ADHD parent support groups and autism parent support groups on Facebook, and I'm the marketing lead for the International ADHD Conference. So, yeah, I got a lot going on, and right now things are going really good.
Well, that's good. I'm happy that things are going good for you. How did you get into men's ADHD and the whole ADHD society? Because you do a lot.
I got into it because, like a lot of people, I found out that one of my children was coming up. The teachers thought that he was on the spectrum or that he had ADHD, and I knew my ex-wife wasn't going to really put a lot of emphasis on mental health. Wasn't really her style, and so I decided to just learn about it. And the more I learned about it, the more I started identifying my own issues, and you know, it just became a hyperfixation of mine, just learning about ADHD, learning about autism, figuring out what worked for me, figuring out what works for other people. I was a project manager back in the day, so it just kind of all coalesced into becoming an ADHD coach. And, you know, I have always wanted to give back. And so giving back in this case turned into the men's ADHD support group and working with Mark Almodovar, the founder of the organization, and helping him develop a nonprofit from it. And it keeps growing from there. There's just a thirst for knowledge about ADHD, both as like parents of
Mhm.
children, but also as we're starting to understand our own neurodivergence and starting to get a grasp on it. A lot of us in our 30s and 40s and 50s, and it's really starting to open a lot of people's eyes. But getting the knowledge, right? Getting the actual knowledge about what ADHD or autism are out there to the people who need to understand it has been really complicated. And so it's just I want to be a part of that voice. And so I just raised it and I started speaking out and I started doing a lot of work and I started really developing a lot of techniques and skill sets and tips and tricks, and that's all what my coaching is about, is just teaching people how to manage things and have realistic expectations about what it means to have ADHD and or autism.
Do you think so? I study psychology and behavior patterns mostly, because you could tell a lot about people um, by just their behavior patterns. If you just watch for a little bit, you can kind of see into, I don't want to say see what's going on with the person, but it will tell you a lot about the person and how they handle things. And because I deal with that, I know that right now we have a lot of, I want to say, hyper misdiagnosing of different things just because we're different. So do you think that ADHD is ever overdiagnosed when people are multifaceted?
I think, first off, ADHD and autism, they are considered neurodevelopmental disorders, but really what the science is really starting to show us is that they're just part of neurodiversity. They're just a way a brain works.
Mm-hmm.
However, we live in a neurotypical society that's
Mm-hmm.
developed for neurotypical people, by neurotypical people, and fitting people into that criteria of you are either neurotypical or you are broken is a
Mm-hmm.
big part of the problem,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now, do I think with the ADHD and autism are overdiagnosed? No, I just don't think they should need to be diagnosed.
Diagnosed, yeah.
But to be truthful, though, because of the way the world works, we have to be realistic about the situation. We still have to figure out how to manage it. And managing it, honestly, does require for a lot of people medication.
Mm-hmm.
It does require, making sure that you're working with a therapist or, and a coach to kind of redevelop an understanding of who you are. But, primarily what I see working with a lot of the parents that I work with is when we introduce these things to parents and they start putting in place the techniques for children and letting them grow and flourish in the way that they're going to grow and flourish.
Mm-hmm.
Medications may still be needed for like emotional regulation issues and things like that. But often, if they have the support and structure that they need, a lot of children really thrive even with ADHD and autism.
I agree. I think that um when you are, I'll say other outside of what people deem to be acceptable, most times, like you said, your brain just operates and moves differently. But normally you're much more intelligent than the people that are in the group think project.
Yeah, it's not so much more intelligent as it's just differently thinking. You know, uh, it's a we process things differently. I guess that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned with ADHD and autism is that so much about what is different for us is because of the way we perceive and the way that we process the world, right? And we place less emphasis on things that other people place more emphasis on
Hmm.
as important, right? We do not want, or need like small talk, right? It doesn't make any
Right.
sense. Why bother? Let's just get into the actual deep, nitty gritty, like medieval times discussions that we were working on just now. And people find that very disconcerting to
Hmm.
have a person who you may not have seen in 6 months, but they walk up to you, and all of a sudden they're starting the exact same conversation
Hmm.
that y'all ended on, like as if no time had passed, and they didn't say, "Hey, how you doing? The weather's great." Nothing. They just jumped right into it, and a lot of people just don't get that sometimes. And
Hmm.
then of course, whenever you go to like me going to the ADHD conference in Anaheim this past year, like going around all of the different people that I know from the year before, and all of us essentially all doing that exact same thing.
Hmm.
It's so good, but it's just a matter of learning and understanding about ourselves and coming to terms and accepting the things that we can control or that we can't control, and really working on the things that we can and want to work on, but not because of some social expectation, but because of our own personal values and our own personal
Hmm.
strengths. And as a coach, that's really just a lot of what my work is developing that understanding. Because we deal with masking and hiding
Hmm.
a lot of the stuff that we struggle with, that we forget to ask for help for it. So we've got to dig into all that stuff.
Yeah, I I have said more recently that based on the way that my mind works, if they diagnose spectrum autism disorder, I would have definitely. I think I'm on spectrum because the way my mind works is like totally different than the average person. Um, the exactest the detail of the way it my mind functions, it baffles me sometimes because I'm so detail oriented that other people be looking at me like overkill. And then it's so crazy because my son is almost the same way. He's like a by the book type person, like no, it says specifically
Mm.
this. And it is amazing to see the difference.
I think I think a lot of people need to understand like spectrum, because you talked about spectrum, right? And when we're talking about the autism spectrum, we also have to kind of understand the ADHD spectrum, and then we have to understand the neurodivergent spectrum, right? And because what we are really starting to really get a better understanding is people's brains are different.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes a person will exhibit a large number of different ADHD traits. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they'll exhibit a large number of autism traits. And as they kind of go through life and everything, and they're in different circumstances, they'll see things kicking in and on and off. And for some people, it's overwhelming. It's too
Mm-hmm.
much input. It's too much output. It's too much like breaking down in the brain, and causes a lot of issues. And a few years ago, they started understanding the overlap between ADHD and autism was pretty significant, to the point of almost 60% of people with ADHD also have some form of autism or
Mm-hmm.
autism traits. You know, the reason why we don't see the numbers really flesh out in diagnosis, and because ADHD isn't a diagnosis, it's a comorbid issue. But the more that people are starting to see that happening, though, the more that they're starting to recognize that, we diagnose if it's detrimental.
Mm-hmm.
There's no diagnosis if it's not
If it's not
detrimental.
detrimental, yeah.
And so if you've learned to balance ADHD off of autism or vice versa, or you've learned to mitigate a lot of the issues that you struggle with autism, but you still struggle with ADHD, it doesn't mean you shouldn't still have a diagnosis of both of them. It just means because the doctors need to understand the full width and breadth of what you actually struggle with and deal with. And, it's really hard to get like, is this ADHD? Is this autism? No. Okay, let's not worry about ADHD and autism. What do you struggle with? And how can we solve it? Right? That's the biggest question that really needs to be answered. So if you struggle with a lot of issues that are like being distracted, time blindness, not being able to show up on time and stuff like that, like the core symptom issues of ADHD, let's talk about medication and what that looks like and what can help you. Right? If you're dealing with a lot of hyperactivity and you're always anxious and stressed out, how much time are you spending exercising? Right? If you're dealing with a lot of gut issues and like your general health is really down, all right, cool. Let's talk about your anxiety levels. Let's talk about your eating habits, what that looks like. And let's determine, are you eating enough? Are you eating right? Are you like just like piling on like your favorite foods? Because if you're autistic, there's very specific food patterns
Mm-hmm.
that you fall
Mm-hmm.
into, that anything outside of them, especially if you have sensory processing issues and things like that, okay, well, let's work on that. You still need these other nutrients.
Right.
Like those chicken nuggets are amazing, but let's look at how we get some of the other stuff, the omega fatty 3 acids in you and stuff like that. And like this is why we're starting to understand that ADHD and autism is not just to medicate that person. It's a holistic change in lifestyle, starting with your own expectations of who you are and what you deal with. Sorry, that was really long-winded.
No, 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 no. It's fine. I totally understand. So, how has becoming a ADHD and autism coach helped you personally?
I mean, repetition is the father of habits.
Mm-hmm.
The more that we do things, the more that they become a part of our lives. And for people with ADHD, it's really hard, right? It's significantly harder for us to develop habits, because if we're not interested in it, we just don't give a shit. You know what I mean? It's like it's just not important to us, so therefore it's not something that we're going to focus on. But what we have to do is we have to figure out how to take those things that we do need to take care of, right? Working, self-care, making sure we're doing our morning hygiene, our evening hygiene, making sure that brushing our teeth. Like we have to figure out the a way to combine and put all that stuff in place to do those things on a regular basis. And that repetitiveness of me doing that for my own clients, but also just me constantly talking about it on podcasts and with my clients and stuff like that. All of that really reinforces my own habits and makes it easier for me. And a lot of the parents that I coach, right? They come to me and most of them don't realize or don't know that they have ADHD or autism or both. And a lot of times as we're going through on the strategies to help their kids and everything like that, I'm like, oh man, that would really help me out a lot.
Mhm.
Right. Absolutely. Hey, have we talked about how these things are hereditary?
Uh-huh.
Have you been tested for ADHD and or autism? You know, one of the biggest indicators that you may have ADHD or autism is if your kids have it, guys. I'm just saying, if
Right, right.
if you suspect that your child, start
And,
with
and, and
yourself.
if and if not you, then someone in your family
Right.
has struggled with it. I think
But
that is true for most mental health issues, physical health issues, and everything else that we deal with. A lot of times it is something that has trickled down or has a trickle down effect. And then things trigger it. So I know a lot of times people talk about vaccines being a trigger, but vaccines don't just trigger those things. They can trigger anything that is hereditary in your bloodline.
But not no, not necessarily. Like vaccines can't really and there's no science that shows this. Vaccines have zero to do with autism and ADHD. Um, it's the things that we know that because these are genetic and they do have epigenetic factors to them that can be triggered by things, but the things that trigger them are trauma, um, certain brain injuries, certain types of. We noted that there's some lead and other toxicity that you can deal with that can really in some cases mimic or can trigger ADHD. Trauma specifically can trigger the living snot out of ADHD and autism traits. And really, that needs to be explored a lot more as far as the environmental stuff is concerned. But when it comes to diet doesn't cause ADHD no more than it causes anything else like that. Same thing for autism. Just because your child happens to be, taking a lot of, there's a big concern with food dyes and different things of that nature. They don't activate or agitate ADHD. They make the symptoms worse, right?
So
They
that's
make
based on the science that has been shown thus far.
yeah, like
Okay.
there's definitely some dyes out there that will make the symptoms worse, but they don't cause the actual issue. They can just make a lot of the existing symptoms, and whenever they are cut out, the symptoms do get better. It's like when you have diabetes and you eat a lot of sugar, you know it's it makes the situation worse. It's not necessarily the only cause.
So
So
what has been the biggest challenge in taking on this work and applying it to your life as well?
honestly, just maintaining my toolbox, right? I keep finding new things to put in my life because I'm working with clients who are finding different things that work with them. So a lot of times it's also me discovering the tool with them. And then of course I get distracted. And so now I just collect ADHD tips and tricks. Like, I just have this whole, and so sometimes I get overloaded with what I'm working on and everything like that. And I'm working on too many things. And I really have to pull a lot of stuff back, right? I have to really make sure that I'm actively going out of my way to work with people and delegate the work that needs to get done because I just tend to get so wrapped up in it and that I lose track of like family time and
Hmm.
a lot of my own personal goals and stuff like that get wrapped up in the work that I do because you know I love the work that I do. And like that's the key to all professional work, by the way, is finding the thing that you really enjoy and thriving within it.
Mhm.
And then if you have ADHD, recognizing that it may shift and change.
Mhm.
I wear so many hats because I do so many different things, because I know that in 6 months I may get bored of one thing. I still need to make money though. So
So,
diversification is the ADHD entrepreneur's best friend.
do you think that serial entrepreneurs or serial business owners are uh or could have ADHD? Like
I
what makes a person continue to want to do a million things and all at once?
So this kind of goes into something that I talk about a lot, and that is just like neurodiversity is significantly more prevalent than people expect. Because we look at the numbers and they're like, oh yeah, 11% of children have ADHD, 18% of children may have some form of autism. And I'm just like, right. So let's look in the real world at people who thrive in certain environments. Let's look at
Mhm.
CEOs and really evaluate how many of those
Yeah,
people
what
are
we're
on the
doing here.
spectrum of ADHD.
Hmm.
And because when you look at their traits, and let's
Yeah.
use Richard Branson, for example, right? Creates Virgin Airlines, creates all of these different companies from the age 18 on, right? And he just kept creating companies. He kept creating companies, but he never like stayed at a company. And and of course we do know that he has ADHD. He's been diagnosed for years for it, but he had the resources and the ability to do it. And that's where we see us thrive. You see a lot of people with ADHD thriving in emergency room departments. Like
Hmm.
roll up in your overnight emergency room from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. and just find your tribes, people.
Hmm.
I'm just telling you, all those emergency room doctors, every single one of those nurses, every one of them, like.
Hi, I'm Dr. Kaci, not your typical clinical doctor. I am an ordained minister, but not your typical minister. I am also a certified life coach, love coach, sex coach, solution focused coach, transformation coach, and more. I have a whole lot of information that I would like to help you grow with. And I hope that soon I can help you be the best you that you can be. Confidence, spirituality, and purpose. That's wholeness, complete.
95% of them are going to be on the spectrum of ADHD
Hmm.
or autism or both. And it's just because
The level of intensity
right.
would require.
And it's funny because I had last year I had a heart scare kind of situation happen. My blood pressure lost its mind one night, and went to the hospital, wound up getting checked in because it was ridiculous. And it was like those ladies overnight. It was just a party. It was just a wild party. It was like so many people just bouncing off energy and everything like that. And like, yeah, it was grim and we're in the emergency room, but but the
The camaraderie that you
right,
see amongst
yeah,
them is something like nothing else. And I
right,
definitely have been to the emergency room a few times. Even at the VA, if you are in one of the rooms where you can actually be where the floor is and seeing them move. And I mean, it's like what you see on TV, but it is really it's a lot of moving parts all at the same time, constantly, and you cannot be a normal person. and, and and I don't want to say normal versus abnormal, but regular people that are in the regular societal mindset of things don't normally function like
mhm,
that. And that's why it is so pressing when people become doctors. It's just making sure that those people actually want to be doctors and don't just like the hustle and bustle of.
right. And we see the same thing in CEOs, though, right?
Hmm.
Those people, especially those people who are constantly creating new businesses and things like that. That's definitely, there's definitely a difference between an innovative leader and a manager, right? And so when we're talking about the different people out there who are just creating businesses constantly, and it doesn't matter at what level, we see so many people, so many traits of ADHD in people who create businesses constantly, because there has to be that certain drive about the
Mhm.
thing that you're selling, right? The product that you're selling, the idea that you're pitching. There has to be a certain drive behind that, and it really doesn't come from your standard inside the box thinker, right? That person manages a project. That person manages the day-to-day running of that. That person manages like the small detail stuff and things like that. The person with, that we see who are innovative and things like that, they're kind of constantly pushing the envelope on how or what to do about a certain problem. And that's where a lot of my entrepreneurs thrive, is in that constant creation of that concept and then pushing it forward. So a lot of the work I do as an ADHD entrepreneur is finding all those different facets and
Mhm.
kind of cataloging where the importance level of them, and then kind of focus on one thing, move it forward, build a business out of it, and then hire managers to take it over for you, where you just focus on doing the things that you enjoy. And it's a lot of foundation building, is working through the struggles that a lot of entrepreneurs have, because we get locked into having to do everything ourselves and forget about delegation.
So let me ask a question. Prior to having your son and discovering his possible issues, what were you doing before that, and how was that transition?
I mean, I'd been a project manager for going on 6 years at this point. And for me, I had a really rough childhood. I grew up in the dirty South in Northeast Texas, and my dad was an alcoholic, abusive person. I grew up in a cult. And I was
What kind of
really,
cult?
yeah, Southern Pentecostal.
Yeah, I just
And
wanted to because I want to do a show really, um but it was supposed to be a book called Oops, I Joined a Cult and Didn't Know It, and it's really about Christianity because yeah.
yeah. So I'm a pretty hardcore atheist now, and got some pretty traumatic stories about culthood. So I got my first exorcism when I was 10,
Oh, so
because
but you know what? That type of trauma, I'm only imagining the type of trauma that you're about to describe, but any trauma that involves a child and religion would definitely send you into being an atheist. And you know why? Because if God set this shit up for me to go through all of this, then hey, me and God are not on speaking terms, of course.
like
So let's just
uh
start. There's no judgment here because,
I mean, well, ironically enough, though, this is a perfect example of both my ADHD and autistic side kicking in at the same time. I because the pastor was talking about Noah's Ark, right? And we had just had Sunday school, and they were talking about Noah's Ark, and it's the Sunday book story, so it's like all the animals marching two by two, and like none of the catastrophic issues that were actually would have been going on about this time. And we went out there, and of course our pastor was hardcore Old Testament. And so like he started screaming and hollering, talking about, don't be like the mothers holding their babies up to Noah, to asking him for mercy and to take the babies on the ark. And I'm like, I remember being like just 10-year-old little boy going, yo, that's fucked up.
yeah.
Like that's not, and had asked the question at that time. I needed clarification on this situation that just happened. And I chose poorly. I chose so poorly, because the pastor just decided at the exact same time that he had made a great point, and he needed a moment of silence for people to fill with the hallelujahs and stuff like that.
Right,
And
right.
I chose that exact moment, and he did not get a hallelujah. Instead, he got a 10-year-old boy speaking too loud in the silence, going, "Why is God such an asshole?" to his grandmother. And yeah, he didn't take
That
that
was that
well.
the I'm sure he didn't, because it's really why is he such an asshole, because a lot of times in those positions they begin to see themselves as God and as God's one messenger. Then if you say something about anything, then it's an assault on him versus a needing for understanding if there's one to be had. But yeah, so
Yeah, I got drug up in front of the church, and they spent an hour with him and the elders just screaming tongues over me and pouring holy water and holy oil on me, just screaming in tongues. And I'm gonna tell you right now, a 10-year-old, nah, my brain didn't process that. I checked the fuck out. Like, oh man. But it's just like, but my story is not is not singular. Like, we see a lot of this in the men's group. We see a lot of guys talking about different situations that they were put in, not just religiously, but just like by their moms and dads,
mhm,
not understanding ADHD and not understanding autism and refusing to understand these issues, even if they dealt with them themselves. And so many men get locked into the social, expectations that we have about what a man is supposed to be. But,
mhm, mhm,
not only are we most often like neurodivergent in dealing with these different issues, there like comes from being neurodivergent. Most often, neurodivergence doesn't fit the mold for what a neurotypical or, man is supposed to be, right? You unless you happen to be like just like lucky, right?
mhm.
Like, I mean, honestly, that's the fact of the matter. If you start introducing socioeconomic factors into the play, yeah, you may be a super successful CEO and everything like that who has the capabilities to do all these different things, but let's not forget that 85% of people in prison also have some form of ADHD
Mhm.
or autism.
Mhm.
And you have the resources and the ability to get out of it, and a lot of people don't. And so we see a lot of the support comes from getting people to understand addiction and how addiction plays into the self-medication that a lot of us do to manage it on our own, because we're taught that you're not supposed to ask for help. You're taught that you're not supposed to worry about mental health because you can always work through it no matter what. I mean, not really. You a lot of the misinformation about medications, especially like Adderall and stimulants being addictive for people with ADHD. And I'm like,
I think
no.
it depends on the person. But I don't want to debate about it because this is your profession and my opinions are based on experience and the things that I've seen. So I wouldn't want to grander that type of conversation. But there are a lot of factors that play into why people don't seek mental health, and I believe the biggest one is that there was a time and space uh, in this country where if you had any type of mental health issues or anything that was abnormal, you were sent to an insane asylum and you were
100%.
locked away. And so a lot of times people were told, I mean, even if you didn't have mental health issues, when you talk about people who have dreams and see things, or if you think about, I think more about nowadays with people that said they seen aliens and now aliens are a thing, but they were locked away because they seen something that nobody else was supposed to see just yet, because right now it's a thing. So I think the way that mental health has been handled, largely in this country or in the world, period, because even when you think about the witch hunts and all of that, all of those play into the same type of narrative, because if you didn't do what society said was okay, then something was wrong with you and we need to get you up out of here. And like you said, that's when the exorcisms and all of that, because people were different and they took it as something must be wrong. But wrong is not the same as different, and different doesn't necessarily mean wrong. So I think that that is the biggest struggle. And then trying to introduce it, um especially when you talk about medicine and things like that, introducing it in a way that is safe, and anything approved by the FDA at this point is kind of questionable on if it's going to be safe 5 or 10 years from now. But I know that there was a time and place where people were over medicated. They were given medicine just because people didn't want to deal with them. So it changed the way that people even look at getting medicine, when it comes to ADHD with the Ritalins and things like that. And for some people, that can be addictive, but it depends on, I believe, genetics and environmental factors and how it's used, because a lot of people use different medications as a coping mechanism, and they never actually try to address the problem. They just take medicine.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we really work on in the men's group and both my parents' support groups is that medication is a part of the answer. It is not the
The
answer.
answer. Hmm.
And especially with parents, a lot of what I
Hmm.
do, primarily what I do, honestly, with my parents, is just educating them about ADHD and autism, right? Just really giving them the understanding about what these issues are, but and then like dealing with like understanding how do we empower your child.
Hmm.
And we also have to recognize there are medications, and there are definitely cases where medications are needed because
Hmm.
we are dealing with neurochemical issues,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And so, but the medications are put in place to help managing the
Yeah,
specific
a
things.
tool.
Emotional dysregulation is a
Hmm.
key
Hmm.
example. It's probably like the most important aspect of ADHD and autism is emotional regulation. And if that chemistry, if your impulsivity is so degraded because of ADHD, that you cannot stop the emotional outbursts. You
Hmm.
need that
You
support. You
need,
need
yeah.
that help
Hmm.
but the goal, right? The goal, therapy, both for parents and the child, the parent training,
Hmm.
the different techniques that you learn. All of that is built around working to learn how to manage those in what works for that child,
Hmm.
right? Not what works for everybody else, but what works
Hmm.
specifically for that child. And that takes a lot of work on the parent's
Hmm.
part. And and
Hmm.
and then that parent needs to be also working with a therapist to understand their mental health and get and if they
Hmm.
have other mental health issues or if they have
Hmm.
ADHD or anxiety or some other issue, then
Yeah,
they need to be
because
getting that support.
I'm sure secondary issues definitely become a problem, not a problem, but a challenging factor in trying to address one issue, because now as you go deeper, you see that there are other related
Right.
issues that coincide with that. So let me ask you a question. If there was a thing that you can change about the course of your journey, what would it be?
I wish I had known earlier. Right, I didn't discover that I had ADHD until I was in my 30s, right? I didn't even get it diagnosed until I was 34, no, 35. And the same thing for autism. I didn't get diagnosed with autism until I was 37. And I mean, I think like I knew I was weird, right? I knew I was
Right.
weird. I grew up knowing I was weird because everybody told me, "Hey, you're weird," you know. But I think if I had known that it was ADHD and if I had known that it was autism, I think there's a lot of mistakes that I wouldn't have made that you know I mean honestly addiction was my biggest one from age 16 till 21. I was addicted to opioids, right? I was part of the opioid epidemic. And I think if I had known I think I would have been able to sit here and go, got the support and help, because I think my mom would have done what she needed to do. But I was too smart, and
Being
nobody,
smart is a challenge sometimes.
right. And nobody at the time, especially where I lived in BFE, right? Nobody believed that a smart person could have ADHD or autism, because everybody thought Rain Man whenever they thought about autism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, like the very obvious signs of ADHD or
Mm-hmm.
the very
Mm-hmm.
obvious signs of
Mm-hmm.
autism. And I didn't fit that criteria. And I think if I just known that, though, I would have been able to put things in place sooner. I mean,
Yeah,
no, I still would have made very similar mistakes. And guess what? That's what life is all about a series of mistakes that we learn from.
it
And
is.
and I think if I just known that, right? If I just known that instead of I have to make everything perfect,
Mm-hmm.
I think that would have changed my outlook on life.
That is definitely the biggest thing when growing up is that you're learning. You're gonna always be learning until because you've never been where you are right now ever before in this lifetime where you can remember being here and doing exactly, So realizing that we are all learning is a great thing to have an understanding of, especially when you're trying to overcome challenges concerning mental health on any level or scale. Um, I often ask this question because I want to know, do you think that you would be where you are today if you would have changed the things that you say you would have changed?
No, because that's one of those things where I would have listened to my buddy and bought Amazon stock whenever he had offered it to me. I would have actually sat down and actually, well,
Listen,
let's look and see what that situation looks like. And I feel like I probably would have had more enough money if I hadn't been spending it on drugs. I would have been
hmm
actually able to have the $1,000 to
hmm
put down on a
hmm
1,000 shares of Amazon.
I mean, we live
I
and
want
we
to. I
learn.
want like there's some lessons like when I was offered a 1 Bitcoin when it first came out to just have, and I said no.
Yeah,
Like I'm not gonna
don't
buy it.
get me started on the
Oh my
Bitcoin
god.
thing because I
Like,
remember
well,
when it was
crap.
2 cents or $2, and I was like, "Gonna do it? It's
No,
not. This is
so
scam. A
but
scam, all right."
but no, I keep having to recognize that failure is a part of life. Is one of the lessons I had to learn and keep learning and continue to keep learning. And that's the only thing that keeps me grounded. And it's the only thing I see as successful for a lot of my parents and entrepreneurs is getting our mindset around the fact that we have to fail to move forward. Like there's no moving forward without failure. And when you get away from that shame and guilt, I think that's the thing that has had to be resonated or constantly pushed back in place for me is that right there.
Well, I was gonna ask you if you had some advice for people, but that sounds like advice right
Yeah,
there.
yeah, there you go. All done. Just learn to accept failure and grow from it. Right.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing that I see that works the most is people getting away from failure being a horrifyingly bad thing to, to going, okay, what can I learn from it?
hmm
Like we cannot get away from the fact that maybe a failure affects our lives. Maybe we lose our job. All right. What can I learn from that situation? Yes,
To
I
where
need to make
I
sure.
don't put myself back
Right.
in that situation.
Exactly.
hmm
Right. Okay. Actually, that boss was a complete asshole, and all I asked him was a little bit of a heads up on when tasks were due. Right.
hmm
Like that's one of the biggest lessons I had to learn in the corporate world was like, hey, I have a certain issue that I struggle with ADHD, and there are accommodations that I have to ask for. And if that person isn't willing to do it, then maybe this isn't the place I need to be at. And that was a really hard lesson because I was
You
also making a
want
lot of
something a
money.
certain way.
Right. And but, like we just have to learn and getting to that point of learning from the mistake and not dwelling on the mistake is what been one of the key game changers for me and most of my clients.
Okay, so how would people find you if they wanted to get in contact with you? Do you have books, a podcast? Tell us everything we need to know.
You can find me at creatingorderfromchaos.com, all one word. If you're looking up for ADHD coaches, I also, like I said, I run the men's ADHD support group on Facebook. I run an ADHD parent support group and an autism parent support group on Facebook. So you can find me at either one of those places. And, just look up Shane Trapp. I'm all over the place.
All right, Shane. I really enjoyed talking to you about ADHD and autism and your journey to getting here.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
All right, everybody. Until next time, thanks for taking a journey to freedom with us.
Hi, I'm Kaci, Dr. Kaci. Welcome to Speaking Freedom. We are happy to have you, and we hope that we are able to help you in every way possible. Have a good evening. If you've enjoyed this video, like, share, subscribe, and turn on your notifications. New episode every Friday.